a bit more explanation on defaults in general in Design Manager. As we will see, settings can be configured first at the company level, of course, and then these settings default or inherit down to each new project. At the project level, you can make individual adjustments to the settings based upon the needs of a particular client. From the project, these settings then inherit down to each of the items and components in the project. Again, the settings can be overridden at that level as necessary. So essentially, default settings allow you to determine how each project and its specifications are initially configured, but you can always override the default as appropriate to the specific circumstance. As many of these types of settings will be considered pretty sensitive, we allow access to them to be easily restricted by encapsulating them all on the company information window. In Professional, that is under GL, Company Information and Settings, and in Design Manager, it's off of our File menu, Company Settings. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's discuss some of the non-default settings in Design Manager that are used more as configuration tools, restrictions, accounting preferences, etc. that really pertain to the company as a whole. First off, let's look at some of our default accounts. We have our default sales accounts. These are the accounts that will be used for invoicing or recording of the revenue of items when we're not using sales categories in Design Manager. And there's one for each of Design Manager's component types. This right away brings us to a sort of a tangential discussion on both component types and sales categories. Component types are on our component window, and they allow us to classify the component, sort of answering the question, what is the purpose of this particular component for this item? Is it some of the merchandise? Is it freight? Is it crating? Is it shipping, installation, design fee, etc.? So we can classify the component with a component type, and we can also classify the item itself using our sales categories. In essence, what is the purpose, or what type or what classification of the item are we using? Is it furniture? Is it accessories? Is it antiques? And the sales categories are wonderfully helpful in that you can run reports based upon sales categories to answer questions like, how much profit did I make on accessories this year? Or how much furniture have I sold to my clients? But moreover, and more pertinent to our discussion today, is that the sales category also has a pre-configured set of sales or revenue and cost of goods sold accounts associated with it. So when I classify an item as furniture, for example, I have this entire set of revenue accounts, so I don't need to remember to use the 41,900 revenue account when I invoice the client, nor do I need to remember to use the 51,900 furniture cost of goods sold accounts when I record the bills. Just by classifying the item as furniture with the sales category, Design Manager handles all that accounting for us. However, if I don't use the sales category, I go back to my company, and these will be the revenue accounts for the particular component type. Similarly, we have a set of default cost of goods sold accounts, and we're going to get back to talking about component types and sales categories a little bit further on, but let's keep all this information in the back of our mind, how these 2 or 3 different concepts interrelate throughout Design Manager. Next is our other accounts. The other accounts are basically, very specialized accounts in Design Manager for maintaining fiscal activity for particular types of transactions. And here is a very big caveat. Do not touch these accounts without consulting your accounting professional and perhaps more importantly, Design Manager technical support. Doing so can have profound effects upon your accounting. But we should talk about them in case your accounting professional asks, well, how do I define a work in process account, or what does the vendor deposit account associate to in Design Manager? So let's quickly review each of these. First of all, we have our vendor deposit account. That's an asset account, and whenever we record prepayments or deposits to our vendors used to get the purchase order rolling along, that activity goes into our vendor deposit asset account. We also have a vendor discount account. In the circumstances that, let's say, America's Mattress might give me, 1% off for paying via check or in cash, I could record a discount, which reduces the actual amount I'm going to be paying here. Well, I'm going to alleviate my accounts payable by the full $12.50, put the rest of the activity into some mattress cost of goods sold account, and this $12.50 will be recorded in my vendor discounts account as a negative cost of goods sold. So it's actually reducing my costs and making my net income higher inevitably. Accounts payable, well, that's very simple. Those are all the bills that I've entered that I have not yet remitted payment for. In fact, here they are. These 3 bills sum up to my accounts payable. Work in process. Work in process are the purchases that I've recorded for my vendors that I have not yet invoiced to my client. In other words, these are all the costs that I have brought into the company that are awaiting a transfer of ownership or invoicing to the client. And that is also an asset account. Accounts receivable, another asset account. Those are all of the unpaid or invoices that I have from my clients that have not yet been paid in full. Client deposits, that's a liability account. The client deposit account, when I receive all of my deposits and retainers from clients, that activity resides in the client deposit account and will be alleviated when I use that retainer or deposit on a client invoice. Undeposited funds, a relatively new feature in Design Manager over the last few years. Undeposited funds allows us to record receipts from our clients into an asset account, but then selectively and procedurally move it out of undeposited funds into the selected banking institution or cash checking account. Retained earnings. That is the sum of all of our net income from prior years past. You will never really have to interact or effectively do something manually to retained earnings. Design Manager does all that calculation for you. And then we have our suspense account. You can consider the suspense account sort of as a exchange or a swap account, whereby we're moving activity from the balance sheet side accounts into income statement side accounts, or vice versa. So these are the very specialized accounts in Design Manager that have very specialized functions. Professional Platform has a few others due to Professional's offering of inventory. So we also have an inventory asset account, which is all of the cost of all of the merchandise that my company has on hand that I'm awaiting to eventually sell to my clients as inventory. It has a specialized inventory freight account, so I might include the freight into my inventory account, or I could break it out separately if desired. So Professional has 2 additional accounts for the other accounts. Now, let's see. We briefly talked about undeposited funds. So before we get into closed years and fiscal months, let's hop over to our AR payment types and finalize our discussion of undeposited funds and how it relates to cash receipt payment types. Payment types are used to make entering various cash receipts easier, as you only really need to classify the receipt. Hey, is it a check from the client? Is it a credit card? Is it cash? Is it a wire, etc.? And Design Manager will always record the funds into the appropriate banking institution or cash checking account. You simply tell Design Manager how the funds came in, and Design Manager will put it into the appropriate account. In the circumstances that you always may want your checking to go into an operating account with your bank and credit cards go into a second account, or those sort of circumstances. Further, payment types conveniently group receipts by payment type on the checkbook window. For example, let's take a look at our professional platform. I've got 3 receipts that I recorded, and they're all on my Visa payment type. So if I go ahead and record these into Design Manager, there they go. Now they're on my existing tab. But if we take a look at our checking window, checkbook tab, here is my singular deposit slip for Visa. And if we look at our details, I can see the 3 Visa transactions that comprise the entire $7,819.70. This is very convenient because generally, particularly for credit cards, Visa is going to post or batch your entire day's worth of transactions as a single entry. So rather than having each one of these individual Visa transactions be listed separately on my checkbook, we group them automatically together for you, which makes reconciliation a lot easier. So if we look at our reconcile window, we can see there is a single entry for the Visa transactions that we put in today. So we try to make all of the natural cash receipt transactions occur to match up with what really happens in the real world. So with that being said, back on our payment types, we can configure payment types to first go into the undeposited funds account rather than going directly into my cash checking account. And when the payment type is configured as such, the transactions go into the undeposited funds account and they will be listed on our Make Bank Deposit tab on our checking window. So they're going to remain here until we actually process a deposit slip indicating that we physically went to the bank and deposited the funds. This process allows us to record receipts into Design Manager as they're received from the client, so they're not overlooked while we're still allowing us to deposit them altogether when we actually go to the bank. Most commonly, you're going to use payment types for checks and cash as credit cards, wire transfers, and those sets of transactions are reflected in our bank instantaneously or automatically. Now, let's take a look at how all that works. I've recorded a few retainers, one for the Carters and one for the Hilsons, both via check. And I have my check payment type set for requires a deposit to be made or goes into undeposited funds. In other words, I want to record these funds into Design Manager the second that I get the check, but I might not be going to the bank for a few days. So I first put the activity into our undeposited funds. So it's in my undeposited funds asset account, and it's also on our Make Bank Deposit tab on our checking window. So now I can actually, when I'm ready, say tomorrow or today, I'm going to go to the bank and deposit these checks. I come into my Make Bank Deposit tab, and I process a deposit slip. And I may actually have numbers on my deposit slips, which, by the way, we Nelco, the company Nelco provides Design Manager's deposit slips, so you can actually order the forms and print them directly on the deposit slip and deposit it at the bank. And they may or may not have numbers depending on your preference. If you don't have a number, you can just use today's date or what have you. And then we actually process deposit slip, and this is, again, would print directly onto that Nelco form. And just like we're adding in receipts or making an invoice, we actually process the deposit slip. We drop those entries off Make Bank Deposit, and now they're in the checkbook. But recall, I entered those on 6/24 and 6/25 earlier in the week, but I didn't go to the bank until today. So now this is going to be much more indicative of the actual bank statement, and then I have a single deposit slip when I go to reconcile my cash that matches precisely when I actually did so in the real world. So payment types have so many functions. One, they allow you to really classify that the receipt, so you don't need to remember what particular account you want to post into. Just select the right payment type on your cash receipt window. Design Manager will handle the accounting for you. And secondly, if you want to utilize that very convenient undeposited funds feature, you can get all your receipts in and then process that deposit slip when you actually go to the bank. So all of that is sort of handled from our company information window, but is very encompassing throughout all of Design Manager. Now, that being said, let's hop back to some more settings. For example, let's go to our closed year in Design Manager and our fiscal month tab in Professional. In Design Manager, you're allowed to put in a particular calendar year to say, I have closed this year, I no longer want any activity to affect that year. For example, it's now late June, almost July. I could put in 2013 into my company information closed year tab, and that would prevent me from inadvertently posting any cash receipts or avoiding any checks or making an invoice, what have you, using a date prior to the first of this year. Why would you do that? Well, hey, we've already made, we've submitted our taxes, we've paid the government based upon information that we have in Design Manager. We want to keep that information for last year fixed and immutable, so we're not changing any figures that we have already set on to the government for income taxes. Obviously, and as stated right next to the year itself, you clearly would not want to put the current year into this field. If I put 2014 in, I would not be able to record any accounting transactions. So obviously you want it the year before or any year prior. But again, a very nice convenient safeguard so you don't affect prior year's books. Professional. The Professional platform allows a company to have a non-calendar year-end fiscal year. That means that the company's fiscal year may not end in December, but rather it ends in, April. So in Professional, we can close particular fiscal periods rather than an entire calendar year. And it's also a little bit more advanced in that you can not only close accounting, but you can specify what type of accounting. Well, you can shut down accounts receivable transactions, accounts payable transactions, and even general ledger transactions such as journal entries, all independently of one another. So this is syndicating that I don't want to have anyone posting or affecting any transactions up to and including last fiscal month or May of 2014. There's a few more features on the Professional platform here, and there's some very important options. One, we have the allow posting prior to the calendar date of the last reconciliation option, along with the allow unclearing of checkbook credit card entries. Both of these come unselected, and here's why. The allow posting prior to the calendar date of the last cash reconciliation. That means if this is selected, I could go in and record a check or record a cash receipt into, let's say, March or April of this year when I have already reconciled that checking account. Well, if I reconcile the checking account successfully through April, putting any transactions into April or before simply doesn't make sense because they would have been indicated on my bank statement. So obviously this one comes unchecked. Why would you ever need to check it? Well, if you need to void a check in the past that was never really cleared, the vendor lost it, or if you processed a reconciliation that had a difference in it and you have tracked down that difference, you could come in, select the option, make your changes, come back into the company information, and unselect it again. Similarly, you have the allow unclearing of checkbook credit card entries. Well, if you have successfully reconciled your checkbook or credit card, it would be fairly rare that you would want to have someone go into the checking window and unclear an entry because you've already cleared it and cleared it successfully. Again, you may want to do so when you're affecting prior months when you found errors but in general, you'd want that to be undesirable. Another option in professional, again, since professional can have a non-calendar year end, it's the fiscal month that really determines where a particular transaction is going to show on your financial statements. So you may have an entry dated in April, but you may have a fiscal month of, let's say, 07. In that case, it's going to be shown in the 7th month of your fiscal transactions, regardless of the date. Design Manager, on the other hand, whatever date you put into a vendor invoice, for example, that's the date it's going to show on your financials. So to help the professional people along, you have a couple options of how you want your fiscal months to be configured. You can do so where I want to always use the fiscal month that is as shown below. So if I'm entering in vendor invoices, notice that the default fiscal month is the one on my company information window. I have another option where I could say, hey, default the fiscal month to one more than my last closed month. This is very convenient when the accounting team is trailing a little behind in their work, in that they still may be entering transactions into fiscal 5 when we're actually in currently fiscal 6. So they have not yet closed 5. They want everything to go into 5 rather than 6. As soon as they close the month, then everything will default to the next fiscal period. So it's just a little bit of option to make your financial entry a little faster. And then there is the sort of highly sensitive area where if you ever needed to change your fiscal month, you could do so using this information. But again, contact Design Manager if you ever need to do something like that, because again, that has profound fiscal and tax implications. So you have ways of controlling data entry to prevent yourself from inadvertently affecting past periods. A little more bit robust in the professional platform, but the Design Manager platform also has the same safeguards to lock down various years. Next, obviously we have our logo tab, but many of you obviously know that you can put in your company logo into Design Manager, and you can do so in a few ways. You could scan in a copy of the image. If it's on your computer or network, you can use the load button and simply select it and manually put it into Design Manager, or you can even copy and paste it using the paste image from clipboard option to get it in. And this is going to appear on your invoices, proposals, purchase orders, statements, and professional platform on your delivery tickets as well. And here we have an option. Many times I'll see logos that have the company information included in the image, and in that case you may not want Design Manager to also print your company information, as it could be redundant. So then you would use the logo includes company contact information, and that'll prevent Design Manager from showing the address, etc. In my case, I don't. It's simply a fictional Vita Nova logo, so I would leave that unchecked. Now, let's move on to some options in Design Manager under our Advanced Options functions, which is located in Design Manager on the Company Information Advanced, likewise on the Professional Company Advanced. And that brings us close to our halfway point. Liz, do we have any questions out there?
Brad, we don't have any questions that we haven't answered at the moment, so I think you can move forward with the presentation.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Liz. So, a little bit less accounting oriented now. Let's talk about some of the more features that you might use just to kind of hone your experience in the way you want your company to run easier in Design Manager. So on our Company Advanced options, we have lots of things that we can configure. Let's go ahead and take a look. The first tab is our Print tab. How do we want Design Manager to handle various printing tasks? First is our Copies. The Copies is used when you are printing directly to your print device from Design Manager. In other words, you're not using the print preview window, you're going to shoot it right off to the printer itself. When you're doing so, how many copies would you like And again, you can configure that for each of the various types of documents independently. The style allows you to pick the format of the optional document. LTTR-8D is abbreviated for letterhead. The letterhead option would tell Design Manager that you're going to print the particular document, in this case proposals, on your physical company letterhead, so Design Manager will no longer print the company information and will use a different set of margins, which we'll talk about in a minute. The abbreviated header, what this option allows us to do is we can save space on lengthy documents, but still provide non-traditional, still provide a mechanism to display our company information on the first page. What that means is, if I'm using abbreviated header on my purchase order, for example, the first page of the PO will show all my company information and the normal quote-unquote header information. On every subsequent page, though, I'm not going to print the company information and only the purchase order title, page, etc. So I maximize my paper real estate and minimize the length of the overall document. Page X of Y. This option, when looking at a multi-page document, the page numbering system will say this is page 2 out of 7, or the current page out of the total page. If it's unselected, you'll simply see the current page, page 3, page 4, etc. Collate. When printing directly to your print device, do you want Design Manager to collate the documents? Collate prints out, if we're printing 2 copies, we'll do page 1, 2, 3, next set 1, 2, 3. Non-collated would print page 1 and page 1 again, page 2 again, page 3 again. The ref number option. You can selectively prevent the reference number of your specification from showing on the various documents. We generally have it selected so it does show on all of the particular documents. Why? It becomes sort of a little complicated to associate a particular item on a proposal. If you have a very vast project, let's say 1,000 items in there, and you may have some very similar carpet or particular accessories, not showing the reference number can be a little confusing when you're trying to track down that item. But the option is there to not show it on particular documents. Margins. We have 2 sets of margins. We have one for when we are using letterhead. So in this case, for proposals, I would have a 2-inch margin so it can print nicely on my pre-printed letterhead. At the top and the bottom would use 1/3 of an inch. And then my non-letterhead margins would be for all the others, and I would do 1/3 at the top and bottom. If your print device seems to be cutting off on the bottom or top of the printing from Design Manager, come into your company advanced options and just raise the margin a tad. That'll tell Design Manager to start printing a little bit lower, and it'll prevent the cutting off, particularly at the top or bottom. Trim printer alignment. If you are printing your checks through Design Manager and notice that it's not the text and the numbers and the dates are not aligning just perfect onto your check, you can raise or lower the printing by putting a positive or negative number in here. For example, if I put 0.2, I would lower the printing on my check by 2/10 of an inch, or if I put in a minus 0.2, I would raise the check printing by 2/10 of an inch. This also does affect the printing of your 1099s. So if those are not lining up perfectly on your 1099 forms, you can come in here, set your trim alignment, print them out, and then change it back to its original value. Along with the printer alignment, you have the check position. We again get our checks from the company of Nelco, and they come with 3 really popular forms where it would be the middle, which is going to have a stub at the top of the document, check itself in the middle, and then another stub at the bottom. Or you would have check at the top, stub, stub, or the bottom format where it will be stub, stub, check. So whatever type of checks that you prefer, you can configure that in Design Manager as well, and middle definitely seems to be the most common. The highlight bar, as many of you have probably noticed when you're printing your reports, Design Manager will show a highlight bar so you can distinguish between rows a lot easier when looking at reports. If you choose not to do that, or you want to save ink or what have you, you can unselect the highlight bar and it'll disappear from all of the reports. Timestamp. Design Manager is going to show when a report was printed by default, so you can see, hey, I printed this profit analysis a few weeks ago and I'm comparing it to a current one, or you can note different changes. So we print the time and date on reports by default as well. Professional has a show status color option. As our professional attendees know, the Pro platform has our color-coded item status codes, and certain reports such as the pre-billing and others will print that color-coded status. But if you don't want to waste the color ink, which can be a little expensive, you can uncheck that and it'll no longer show the colors of the statuses on those particular reports. Lastly, we have a Keep Item Description Together option. What this does is on your proposals and invoices, you can tell Design Manager if you'd rather have an item's description break naturally between two pages, in the case that the description is running into the bottom and then starts again on the subsequent page. If the item description together is defaulted, what that will do is it'll say, hey, I can't contain this entire description on one page, so I'm not going to print any of it on page 1, then I'll begin it entirely onto page 2. So that's another option for personal preference. And in Design Manager, that's not on the Print tab, it is on our General tab right at the bottom there. Now, our General Advanced options. A lot of this information are one of those settings that are inherited down to our projects. For example, if we look at one of our projects, Design Manager, Defaults, Advanced, notice we have a very similar setup as well. So these configurations default down to the projects and then can be honed on a project level as well. Let's take a look at what a lot of these guys mean. Now, we talked about component types when we were discussing our sales and COGS default accounts. Now, component types, except for merchandise and time, are entirely customizable. A component type can be created for any good or service that you want to track, price to the client, or most importantly, tax differently than traditional merchandise. Design Manager comes pre-configured with freight, crating, installation, labor, or design fee, but they can be used however you want. You may not like freight to be called freight. You may choose to call it shipping. Certain areas in the country actually consider freight and shipping entirely differently. One is taxed and one is not. So in those cases, I've seen people have freight and shipping as individual component types. Notice when I tab out of the shipping screen title, I automatically change my component type on the screen and throughout the entire software as well. So you can really configure what types of goods and services are important for you to track, and again, more importantly, tax appropriately to your clients. So, component types. Pricing type and percentages. Design Manager allows you to come up with a normalized scheme of creating your pricing structure for your clients, and you can do so for each of the component types, excluding time, individually. And you've got a few options. You can mark up the cost. You can discount off of list, where you would enter in the list price from the vendor with a particular discount percentage to calculate the sell price to the client. And you can even use a fee structure. Fees are usually used more for design fees, as we can see here, or purchasing fees, or they're used when the design firm generally handles more commercial firms or act as purchasing agents, whereby your firm goes out, procures all these goods and services, and receives a fee based upon the cost of each. In those such cases, the clients for the design firm tend to pay the vendors directly. So you can do fee pricing as well. And then next to the type is the particular percentage. I generally want to mark up my merchandise 30%, my freight 10%, crating 5%, etc. Again, all of this will configure down to every new project that I create, but I can always override it and charge the Smith, say, 50% rather than my traditional 30 or what have you. INC in DEP. This is our include in deposit option. When I am calculating my deposit percentage for each of my clients, do I want these particular types included into that figure? Very commonly, I'll see firms only want to have the merchandise as part of the deposit and not freight and the other types. But it's entirely up to you, and you can configure it as such. Auto feature is very handy in that for every merchandise component that I create, I'm automatically going to create another of the specified type. For example, let's say design fee. In particular areas throughout the country, I think New York City is a prime example, the cost that you're taxing on merchandise is different than what you would on design fee. So in those cases, for every piece that I am reselling to my clients, I need to have a merchandise component for the cost of the item and a design fee for what I am charging. And to make that data entry faster, by using the auto selection, I enter in my chair merchandise component, and I'm automatically going to have a design fee component created for me, so I don't need to take that extra step. I've also seen firms always want to have a freight component generated, so they don't forget to include an estimated freight. And by having the auto selected, it does that extra step for you as a checks and balances to ensure they are indeed estimating and passing on the freight. So the auto selection is very handy as well for lots of different circumstances. Now, in our options, we're getting lots of other sort of features that we might want to think about. We have our include tax and deposit. Well, when we're calculating our client deposit amount, do we want that amount to be including the tax or not including the tax? And I've seen about 50-50 for how firms want to handle that. Show discount option. What this does is for the particular project on my proposal and invoice, right beneath the item description, it would say a verbiage of a discount of X has been deducted from the list price of Y. So it'll show you it'll show the client what they would have spent at paying retail, and it'll also show the discount that you're affording them. So it shows them the benefit of using your services. The show markup is very similar, and it'll provide verbiage that says the price includes a cost of X with a design fee of Y. So again, you're showing your client how much you were charged from the vendor and the amount that you are charging as a fee or for your services. Design Manager has an option for Autowhip Accounting. Now, the professional platform, work in process accounting is inherent, and there's no way to easily, well, there's no way at all to turn that off. Some of our smaller firms, though, don't need to use work in process accounting. Basically, they put a bill in from the vendor, and they want that cost to go immediately into the appropriate cost of goods sold account rather than into work in process first. So we always sell the software with Autowhip Accounting selected, but a smaller firm may want to just turn that off and go right into cost of goods sold. Again, that is an option that you would check with Design Manager or your accounting professional first before changing. That being said, it goes hand in hand with the bypass WHIP option. If a firm does both, let's say, model homes and residential homes, very frequently model homes will you'll invoice the contractor or the developer just for the contract, $100,000, or maybe you'll say you'll give them 4 invoices for $25,000, a fixed contract amount, and you're not actually invoicing the individual goods and services as you would do on a traditional residential project. In that case, you might want to bypass work in project for those types of model home projects. So the costs go right into cost of goods sold, as you're never going to individually invoice them to clients. So that's the bypass work in process option. It is not a retroactive feature. For example, if you have lots of things sitting on your work in process account, on your work in process report for a given project, simply by selecting that option is not going to drop that off of WHIP. You would still need to process invoices for those naturally. Require manager. On the project window, you have a salesperson manager code, which is optional to associate a particular designer or design team with a given project. The require manager would enforce that that has to get entered each time. So that's generally used for the larger firms that may have a principal and a few designers, or a principal, several senior designers and design assistants. You may want to insist that that gets recorded. You require sales categories. We talked about our sales categories, which are on our items. Let's take a look again. Here's our bed as a sales category of furniture. If the require sales category is unselected, I could create an item and not put a sales category in. And that, as we discussed, is going to use the appropriate sales and COGS accounts on our company window. But by using the require sales category, I'm forcing all of my users to put in a particular sales category. Generally, I suggest that option. I find the sales categories to be very, very valuable tools in both allowing me to generate reports based upon the sales category, so I have a much better indication of what is being profitable in my company, what particular goods and services I'm selling more of or not selling enough of, etc. So I generally suggest to have that option selected, and it forces the user to put a sales category in. We also have our user date 1 and 2. You may have seen throughout Design Manager, for example, on our purchase order status window, we have user date 1 and 2 listed. And you'll see that throughout the software, in the component window and many other areas. Well, Design Manager comes configured with a multitude of dates already inherent, acknowledgement dates, order dates, delivery dates, etc. But there could be a few dates that your firm wants to track specially. And in my example, I put in one for install date. And I have no use for the second one, so I still have it blank. But you may want something like, I don't know, site visit date. And then now I can use the site visit date as a order tracking tool throughout the software. Moreover, the user dates have their own order tracking report under user defined dates. And you can use this report to run your order status report for everything with an install date, without an install date, etc. So you can kind of configure an additional set of tracking information that is unique to your company. So you have the custom or wildcard user date 1s and 2s. Lastly, on our general tab, we have our client deposit percentage. In general, how much do I want to require each client to provide me for particular goods and services on our proposal? Could be 50%, could be 75, whatever your company dictates. If you leave it set to 0, as in this case, you would then enter it in on a per project basis, so each subsequent item has the particular deposit percentage necessary. And of course, as we've already discussed, you can always override that on each item as necessary, from 50 to 75 in this example. So the General tab has tons of information and settings that you can configure that not only default down to each particular project that we're adding, but it also allows you to really classify the way you want Design Manager to marry to your business model. Now, you'll notice we do have tabs for proposal, invoice, and purchase orders, and they have lots of settings themselves. We have already, since we have a limited 1 hour here, each of these have been discussed on various webinars we've done in the past. Particularly, we just did proposals and invoices in the last few weeks, so feel free to review our pre-recorded webinars on our YouTube page, and you can get a whole listing of what these particular settings do on the proposal and invoice documents. And don't forget, use your help button on that particular tab, and you can easily see which each setting does. Now, with our remaining time, I would like to focus on a few of the professional-only company settings. And before I do so, I'm going to turn it over to Liz to see if there's any questions that might be out there.
Brad, we don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to hop off of our Design Manager platform and focus exclusively on a few extra settings just for our professional attendees today. And let's see, so we went all the way through our payment types. Professional users have our purchase order PO work order tab. You have an option to input conditions for your PO. The terms that you want to appear on every purchase order can be entered in here. Please contact 1, 2, 3, 4 on any issues or what have you. And any particular verbose terms and conditions you want can be entered in here and will print on every purchase order for you. For those of you who have a fax server and still use the traditional faxing method in Design Manager, you could put in a fax cover page remarks, and here's where you would enter in that Microsoft fax server. And you also have an email option where you could put in text that would appear on every email PO you send out. So you have some configuration tools just for your purchase and work order system. There is also the underutilized schedule tab. Design Manager allows the professional users to put in up to 10 general phases that your business goes through as it monitors the life cycle of your project. And I've just put in a few examples to illustrate. You can optionally put in day durations as well. Basically, how long does it take each of these phases to go through? This schedule will then default down to each new project that you create. For example, if we look at our Hilson Pocono home, here's our schedule tab on our specification window. And all of my phases have come down appropriately. Here, I could customize the length or duration of each of them and input the particular starting and ending days. And it creates this very nice, what they call a Gantt chart that allows you to monitor the project through its phases in a nice color-coded system. And you can even print that out for your reference as well. So I tell many of my trainers when I'm out in the field training clients about the project schedule, as it's very often overlooked, and it gives you a nice tool to really hone in the internal scheduling to prevent conflicts and make sure everyone's on the same page for the various projects going on in the company. So that's the schedule tab. The AP payment type tab. Just like we discussed cash receipt payment types and how they can categorize the receipts or funds you receive from your clients, Accounts payable payment types allows you to group or classify all the company bills, expenses, deposits by the anticipated method of payment. For example, say we're adding an operating expense. We always have the option to pay with check, of course. We have all of my pre-configured payment types, and of course, any credit cards that I've created in the software as well. So what this allows us to do is on our checking window, I can quickly see how I'm anticipating to pay a particular bill or invoice to the vendor. I can narrow down my list to say, oh, I want to work only on the entries that I'm going to pay online. And by doing that, I can use my tag feature to quickly select all of those and process my pay onlines. You can also change those. I have my America's Mattress set to pay via check, but I may actually call them in and put it on my debit card. So I can change the payment method as well very quickly. So you can classify your payment types, particularly useful for larger firms where there could be hundreds, if not thousands, of bills coming in any given month. So payment types on the AP side are very handy as well. And you can create them on our AP type. Hit the Add button. Let's say we want to create one for debit cards. All right. Type description will be debit card. What account is this going to be paid from? My cash checking, my money market, or if I was doing some sort of credit card pay with, I could use my credit cards as well. Our debit card comes right out of our checking account. And then I can change the priority of them. For example, I always want my check to be my first selection, and I want my online bill pay to be second. And if we save that and look on our vendor operating expense window, we go check, online bill pay, debit, and this follows our priority setup exactly. I find the payment types extremely helpful for entering in bills and really allowing myself to process transactions quickly. If I want to pay everything with American Express, I do my later with Amex, grab them all, and use my credit card function. So it really speeds up your payment entry. Now, that brings us close to the end of our webinar today, so I wanted to focus on a few of the professional-only features in the software. And again, I remind everyone to go out to our help center where you can input any questions you may use, and you can easily get to prior webinars in the past. And there they are. You can use these to review proposal settings, invoice settings, etc. All of this will be brand new in a few weeks, our new Design Manager Help Center. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Liz to have any questions.